Okay, I'm going to let people continue to roll in, but in the essence of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Bobby, the president of Campus Compact, and this is the first of a new virtual networking session that we're doing for our TRUCEN network, which is the University Research and Civic Engagement Network that brings together our R1 campuses. And so I'm really excited that the first topic we're diving into, I think, is something that is really emblematic of what we want to do with these, which is really deepen the opportunities of how we think about our roles as civic and community engagement leaders around specific areas of focus. And so for today, we're going to be focused on university-based climate policy, and a question that Leah, who's going to be presenting in just a little while, has been diving into and is going to be able to offer us some rich research findings to help guide some questions going forward. In the essence of time today, I don't think we were going to do formal introductions, but it would be great if for folks that are here with us today to go ahead and drop into chat their name and their institution affiliation and anything else they would like to. And to kick us off, I am going to start by introducing our facilitator today, and that is Bemi. And Bemi is the Associate Director for Strategic Initiatives at UCLA, the Center for Community Engagement. She's responsible for advancing community engaged scholarship across the institution. She provides tons of leadership in a variety of areas, from incentive structures to navigating resources for engaged teaching and research. And she works closely with departments across the entire campus, including community engaged teaching and research, and facilitating socially innovative ways to enable sustained and reciprocal partnerships. She also oversees, which is really relevant for today's conversation, the center's environmental, sustainability, and international development efforts. She teaches an environmental justice course and a community engaged research capstone course. She earned her PhD in urban and environmental planning and policy at UC Irvine, and before that worked in environment and international development in Washington, D.C. and abroad. And I will welcome Bemi.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, Bobby. It's great to be here and be a part of this. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce Leah Kalinsky-Jones, who will be sharing her community policy engagement research today. She is an interdisciplinary social scientist whose work focuses on sustainable, just, and climate resilient food systems. And within this area, she tends to focus on two primary domains. So one, university-based engagement efforts, and their impacts on supporting food and climate social movements, and two, collaborative and participatory policymaking approaches towards food systems and climate resilience. As a current civic science fellow at Johns Hopkins University, she investigates a university-based climate policy engagement in local communities. Prior to Johns Hopkins, she spent over a decade working in outreach and international affairs at Virginia Tech. She holds a PhD and an MS in agricultural leadership and community education from Virginia Tech. And it's been great to work with Leah in this endeavor and this activity, and it's great. I'll hand it off to her.
Thank you. I want that to happen. Thank you so much, Bemi, for that lovely introduction. And of course, to Bobby and Campus Compact for prioritizing this, this conversation. And I'm delighted to get to contribute to it today. Let me share my slides. Does that look good to everyone? Perfect. Okay. So as Bemi mentioned, my name is Leah, and I'm a civic science fellow at Johns Hopkins. And this presentation is so exciting to me because it is one of the culminating products of my fellowship. This fellowship program is a group of about 22 individuals at a variety of institutions, academic and otherwise, that are all thinking about how we better connect science and society. So you'll see that as a little bit of a thread throughout this. I want to thank Adam Levine for being an amazing collaborator and host for my fellowship, and also the Rita Allen Foundation for their generous funding of this work. So without much ado, let's go ahead and jump in. What I aim to do with you all today is to offer why the approach that we took to surveying local unmet desire, the needs of localities around sustainability, and specifically around policy engagement, matters. And I want to share with you all not only why it's important, but how our approach could be used by you on your campus or by your colleagues. And I'll do that also by revealing some select findings just to show you what the approach yields. And then we'll move into discussion that Bemi will facilitate on how we might apply this work to campus engagement. Let me just make sure the chat is okay. Perfect. So we focus on university locality climate engagement broadly because it can have such a sizable impact on a locality. Researchers research faculty at universities can really understand the local context in ways that someone from far away may not be able to. And so their outputs may be more suitable to the local context, may have more success in achieving results. We also know that localities who have made climate commitments have more ambitious goals. So specifically net zero when there's a university in the community. So when we think about the urgency and the necessary shifts we need in order to take climate action, universities really matter. The problem is that not all research that is produced at universities gets used. And so we use this language of supply to communicate research production, and including the activities that are done, the topics that are chosen, who's doing it with whom, and then research use, the demand for research. And so there's a gap between the supply and the demand. Making this worse is that research on policy engagement, so people like me, but not me since I'm doing this, often focus on supply. They're focusing on how are universities engaging and with whom, et cetera, but they fail to fully attend to the needs and of the local communities. And so that gets neglected in policy engagement scholarship. So we argue for the better need to connect research and society. This is probably something that resonates with you all, given your commitment to community engagement. But this is not without its challenges. So these types of collaborations tend to emerge organically via informal relationships. This means it's incumbent on two people meeting and two people making those connections in order to collaborate. Moreover, sustainability professionals and policymakers may not have mechanisms to communicate their needs, to become connected to the university's research and engagement arms. Similarly, faculty may not have the capacity to go out into the community and fully engage. So we have this sort of like disconnect. And so we need approaches that can do this connection that we're seeking. And a bunch of scholars have called for a third-party human to do this type of work, whether that's the term knowledge broker, boundary spanner, or matchmaker, someone who can facilitate these types of connections. So our work really focuses on these two gaps, the first being the failure of research to fully attend to the demand among local communities for these types of research, and an approach for us to understand this demand. So what we'll cover today is an approach that is empirically tested, transferable, and scalable for you to study the demand for policy engagement in your area. We're spotlighting sustainability, but I'll offer that this could be extended to other topics and has been by Adam in other research domains, and in turn supports connecting research and society. So our methodology, we first asked, how are the research of engaged universities, which is the TRUCEN network, meeting the climate policy needs of local sustainability professionals? I used the 2021 TRUCEN list and identified sustainability policymakers within each school's county. This yielded a population of 68. From there, every sustainability policymaker was invited to an elite interview where we asked about their greatest challenges and their research needs, how they were collaborating, their interest in collaborating, and their perceptions of research and researchers. I then paired this data with quantitative data that's publicly available on demographics, organizational variables, and climate data, specifically climate risks. All right, so looking at our approach, how did we proceed with these interviews and how you might be able to use this? The first question simply asks, what are your top 3 challenges associated with climate change? And so each challenge, challenge 1, challenge 2, and challenge 3 is populated within this table. From there, questions 2 through 6 are asked about each challenge in turn. So how might research be helpful in tackling challenge 1? you insert whatever challenge one is. Are you currently collaborating with XYZ University on challenge one? If yes, what type of collaboration? If no, would you welcome collaboration? And what you end up once this table is completed is you have an inventory of where could a university contribute, where is the university actively contributing, and where might we be able to fill in. So just to give you an understanding of who we spoke with, we had 42 semi-structured interviews from 20 states representing 24 schools. Mostly the schools were in suburban and urban environments, about 50-50 private public, and we had a pretty good spread in the median size of schools. For localities, we had a really large range for our populations. The median was 105, but we were in the millions all the way down to like under 10,000. So we have quite the spread. Staff sizes were small, and tenure in position was also small. And these localities, which are cities, towns, and counties, were mostly blue, as evidenced by the 2020 Biden vote. So we analyzed the interviews with 2 qualitative coders, and then for the quantitative variables, which came both from the interviews and the publicly available data, we regressed to identify how we might explain existing collaboration, which is defined as the current university locality collaborations where they identified research could contribute. And then the unmet desire for collaboration, or the opportunity for collaboration, which is where university locality collaboration is welcomed on these research relevant challenges. Before I shift into providing some of the findings, let me take a second and make sure that there are no clarification questions on what I just covered. Feel free to communicate that by raising your hand or throwing something in the chat or just speaking. Okay, awesome. So moving into the evidence, I visualized here what are the most common challenges exhibited among communities. So at the top, we have resources. I think being at universities, I'm sure you all can identify with this, not only funding and staffing, but also technical capacity, which is one of the themes I'm going to dive into in a second. We also have political support, so that's local and state government support or not, and governance issues such as siloing within the locality, sustainability just being in its own little pigeoned corner and not being a cross-cutting effort, as well as the scale needed of change. Process-oriented challenges spoke to the time it takes to accomplish change, as well as equitable community engagement. Communications were really focused on how we can communicate to citizens as well as policymakers about climate and enact action. And infrastructure spoke to putting in EV chargers, retrofitting buildings, energy transitions. It ran the gamut of all the green infrastructure that we need to tackle climate change. So I mentioned that I'm going to dive into this theme of technical and scientific capabilities because I think it elucidates well where universities might be able to contribute. So Courtney on the left is talking about even when an organization has full capacity, that there are constantly new priorities based on the science, based on industry, and based on incentives. So there's always something new to build. And Sydney on the right talks about how technology is amazing, but technology is advancing so rapidly that they can't keep up with the science in order to quote unquote future-proof how they might move forward. So this is an example, possibly, of where universities might be able to contribute by offering these scientific capabilities that might be lacking among these local policymakers. So overarchingly, what we found is that there's a significant amount of unmet desire, which we can also define as opportunity for collaboration. So 90% of those localities have challenges where research can have impact. And among that 90%, 89% desire collaboration with their local R1 university, specifically that trucking university. There were only 10% within the sample who had all their challenges met. And I wish I could tell you who they are, but I cannot. And so Jackson here is a perfect example of this desire for collaboration about how our interview reminded him that we ought to seek XYZ University's advice. How do we make change in their backyard? And this harkens back to that idea that local faculty may better understand the context within which they're working. In terms of where research might contribute, policymakers are seeking at almost 50% local case studies on what policy actions they can take. So in the face of political obstacles, in the face of budget constraints, what have other localities done? What can I do in order to affect change? Around 30% are seeking research on return on investment. I need to be a good fiduciary of public funds. What's the biggest bang for my buck? What makes the most sense? 30% seek research to communicate. One person said the doom and gloom communication is not working. How can we communicate to people to get them to take action? How can we get residents to change? How can we get politicians to support us? And 17% seek research on planning and prioritization. So they know that there's a lot that needs to be accomplished in order to reach their carbon goals, but they don't know which actions they need to take strategically and in which order. So looking at the quantitative variables of what influences collaboration, we found that the larger the school, the more collaboration. We also found that sustainability policymakers who have been in their positions longer desire more collaboration. We found that there were concerns among policymakers about research being practical, which we kind of define as these concerns about relationality. And this decreases the desire for collaboration because they worry about the collaboration being useful. They worry about the collaboration being practical and applicable. And finally, the more existing collaborations that policymakers have, the less desire they have for additional collaboration. So what does all this mean? The first is that we did find substantial overall evidence of unmet desire, which is negatively affected by these relational concerns around how people are going to connect and and how their work is going to be useful to me. Policymakers' capacity matters, whether that's how long they've been in their position and how confident they may feel in what they're needing to do, or saturation with how many collaborations they're having. We offer of this approach, oopsies, I did not mean to do that. We offer of this approach that, it's limited by our sample. And so we suggest that there's a lot of room for this to be expanded on. For example, we could investigate different schools or types of institutional efforts. So all of the trucking institutions that were part of our population have some form of climate change or sustainability center. But centers and institutes look very different, and they have very different makeups. Do those types of arrangements matter in terms of collaborations? Our sample was mostly suburban and urban, and so there's really a lot of opportunity here to look into the rural-urban divide. Although I hate saying divide because they're whatever. And there's also opportunity to look at other complex societal issues. So I mentioned that Adam has used a similar approach among neuroscientists and among AmeriCorps, which he's happy to speak to if that's of interest to anyone. But this can be expanded into the health domain, or into the food systems domain, or into education, so on and so forth. So where do we go from here? We recommend that for those that could care about community engagement like us on this call, we can and we should be measuring unmet desire. It's really a responsibility for us. And we have a handout, which is broadly applicable to you all to use. So the approach that I offered, I can go ahead and put it in the chat for you here. It's in the form of a Google Doc for you to download and use and build upon. We also offer that there's a significant amount of desire for low resource collaborations, knowledge exchange, conversations, which supports the importance of relationship building and using approaches that we know that are useful and effective at building these campus and community partnerships, such as the CCPH resource that is in the parentheses there. One of the things that I really encourage is that if you are to use this approach and survey unmet desire in your locality, really think critically about your radius and your sphere of influence. So we define that as your county. But is it larger than that? We know that R1 universities have larger, farther away connections than just that. So it could be that there are more specific metrics that you want to pursue, or maybe targeting communities within your locality that have historically and thus still experience environmental injustice? Like, what are the values that are present in your institutional commitment to community engagement? And how does that define your approach? And then we suggest to build on this to identify unmet needs, whether it be in the sustainability or whether you choose to use it to identify other unmet needs. And then finally, and this is really important, it's my pie in the sky dream, is that these types of efforts would be institutionalized, that resources would be attributed to these third-party practitioners who can help do this type of matchmaking, who can conduct these surveys on a semi-regular basis to audit how the university is upholding its community engagement commitments, and then to foster the connections that are needed in order to do those better. So with that, I offer my references, which nobody can read, but I can send these slides out. And the floor is open for questions before we transition to discussion.
Okay, I'm if you have any questions too, feel free to drop them in the chat too. And then we'll have also time for questions in the small group as well. But I can pause for another second, just if anyone's, I'm okay with uncomfortable pauses. Oh, hi, Erin. I see your hand raised. Oh, yay, it's my good colleague, Erin.
Hi,
Welcome.
my name is Erin Coots. I am based at UCLA as well with Amy. And I have been approached by a group at UC Davis to do a project that's somewhat similar in that they're looking for information gathered by a number of community organizations in California to feed back into CARB, our California Air Resources Board, who's did a lot of work around climate action planning. So they've asked a number of us to think about holding a couple of workshops in the coming year. And this framework, these questions that you've set out sort of triggered for me. I'm like, hey, these are pretty solid questions. Have you thought about next steps of like, if we use some of these questions in our events and in our conversations with city leaders, have you thought about a process for then funneling that into state policymakers? Like, what's the right way to then transfer that to state policymakers?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and I'm really glad to hear that you have an opportunity to possibly build on this. And I would really like if you shoot me an Adam, or just me, and I'll make sure Adam's connected and how it goes. Or if we can help support you on the back end, let us know. Mm-hmm. I think that without a policy recommendation, right, there in the absence of that, that's what we need first. And so I think the first step is the survey of unmet desire, fostering these connections, identify where science can be impactful to the challenges that communities are experiencing. And then the result would be policy memos or briefs or an advocacy campaign. Although I know universities tend to sometimes shy away from the term advocacy, but I'm going to use that here to simply mean, advocating for a science-based solution that policy can help support. There are a lot of different ways that this can happen, right? So some institutions have policy labs where there are groups of faculty and students working in tandem to write these types of policy memos. I've seen them in law schools or in public administration programs. And I think sometimes that can be really powerful. I think it needs to be done carefully. Some of the data that I didn't share today was at the end of the interview, I always have that, what would you like to tell me that I didn't ask about? And that's usually an opportunity for someone who's had a negative experience to share that negative experience. And sometimes that meant challenges of working with students. And so I offer this caveat to mean that we need to make sure that there's someone who is managing that relationship on behalf of the university and the community, and not just letting, I don't think anyone's just like, quote unquote, letting students free, but one of the sustainability policymakers mentioned this idea of helping students understand that they're coming into a river that's already been flowing. And I think it's a really eloquent way, a nuanced way to articulate the balance that's needed in some of the engagement that we do in that regard. So I think there are a number of different ways. And Robin has put into the chat that at the University of Miami, they're finalizing a communications toolkit to guide metro areas on fostering campus community partnerships around affordable housing and urban resilience. So this is another wonderful example. And Robin, when that's available, it'd be really awesome to see that. I know that you all do a lot of climate work down in South Florida. You have to. So Aaron, I hope that was sufficiently answer. If not, we can engage further. Or if Adam, if you have anything to add, I know you engage with policymakers all the time.
Hi, Julian.
Hey everyone, thanks for the invitation today. This is my first trucking meeting. So I'm kind of learning and digesting a bit here. So Leah, I don't know if you know Mindy Levin at Johns Hopkins in Source, but she recommended I attend today. And so here I am. I saw in the materials that part of the attendees today were also university sustainability officers. I'm the sustainability director in our Office of Sustainability. And I guess I was thinking, as you talk about policy and sort of the opportunities between policymakers and researchers, you know, to meet the needs of, let's say, like cities or municipalities, or as you were curating today's session, are you also thinking about the university itself? And I ask this because we often see sort of the ships passing in the night paradigm of, we work at a university, we're mini cities, we're trying, you know, we own at Johns Hopkins 15 million square feet of space. We have a 50,000 person community. We're trying to solve for the microcosm of challenges that the city of Baltimore is trying to solve for. How do we build connections between researchers and the university that they work for, or researchers at other universities in our own institutions, maybe thinking about higher education as its own sort of like mini city sector? So I guess that's my question and some rambling.
Yeah, no, I really I appreciate this a lot, because I did use the term researchers, but that's a very limiting term, and sustainability offices were identified among the collaborators that sustainability policymakers were often working with. They sometimes often identified them as someone they're not working with but would like to, because you're really working in very parallel tracks. And the actions of the locality and the university vis-a-vis climate goals intersect, and emissions don't stop at a campus boundary. And so I think that sustainability professionals at universities and those offices and others beyond just the research arm have a really powerful role to play in this domain. And this is just a useful reminder for me in particular to think about a more inclusive term in order to encompass the full gamut of the university's sphere of influence. So I think that was your question, but you might have had a little bit more nuance to it that I've missed. So if you could re-articulate if I've missed anything.
No, that's great. You know, we're just seeing a lot of movement, I think, in the interconnections too between anchor institutions and the locales that they're based in. And so as we think about policymaking and research and opportunities for influencing change in decision making, it's just, you know, it's exciting both within the institutional level, but, you know, the relationships between, you know, Maryland passed climate legislation in the past year, and you know, we have members of the Baltimore Office of Sustainability who participate on work groups here at Johns Hopkins. We have members of our office who participate in work groups at the city and state level, and we have researchers and students in many spaces. And there's this sort of lack of often connection between a lot of actors, all with the same collaborative goals. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that that's likely a challenge that many experience when you get to a certain scale and size. And I do wonder if the kind of the recommendations to have this sort of boundary spanning office or boundary spanning human who might be that connective tissue could be useful. I don't think they'd catch everything, because it's, you know, simply capacity is impossible, and humans are like notoriously bad at communicating. And so in the absence of all of us just becoming amazingly good at communicating about collaborations. I think that we still need that connective tissue, and that needs to be prioritized, because I think we're losing some efficiency there. And I think there's a redundancy that's occurring because of the lack of connection. So appreciate the comment.
Hi, Emily. I think you had your hand up.
I do.
You.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi,
Emily.
Leah. It's really good to see some of the products of this work. I know you've been working on it for a long time. It's really, really cool to see. I was wondering, I have a couple of questions. One, I was wondering if you could expand a little more on you said like people were wanting low resource intensive collaboration. I was wondering if you could expand on what you mean by that a little bit more. And also, I know I mentioned in the chat that I'm actually leaving the Center for Service Learning at KU for a new position with NOAA in their climate adaptation program in the next few weeks. And it's a brand new position. It's all about enhancing collaboration for climate change efforts in the central Midwest throughout Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. They're basically identifying areas that just need a little bit of a push when it comes to climate change collaboration. There's only one other position of its kind. Being in the central Midwest, we need a little push. So what advice, and maybe I would think it would be really good if we connected once I get into my new position, but what advice would you give taking a regional approach? I know you kind of talked about that, but especially the like federal agency, community organization, university collaboration, and how policy might play into that.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations. What an exciting
Thank you.
opportunity for you. And I'm so glad you're
Thanks.
here today. Emily and I connected way early on, like
Very early.
January maybe of 2022,
Yeah.
as I was conceptualizing this. So it's really great to reconnect. So the first around the low resource intensive, what I would offer is that the challenges that were articulated and the research identified tended toward culling of resources. So sometimes it was like bringing together literature and recommendations from that. It wasn't what I would offer to be novel climate science. Sometimes when it came to communications, that was a really interesting place for novel science to contribute. But I think not being a communications professional, there likely is a lot of that research already occurring. And so what the needs are is for someone to translate what's already occurring and to help localities understand what's occurring and how they might use it, and so that they can prioritize and inform what they need to do. And so in turn, that's what I mean by low resource. It's not like there needs to be a 5-year project that's conceptualized and funded necessarily. It's really that sort of engagement piece. And then in terms of the regional approach that you offered to you mentioned your new role is for the entire Midwest, or?
It's the EPA Region 7.
Okay.
It's Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri.
Okay. Regardless, that's a pretty large
Right.
geographic scale. And so what I would think about is, if you wanted to use an approach like this, how might that be, how might we scale that up larger? Is it a whole bunch of interviewees contacting a whole bunch of policymakers? That's resource intensive, but may have a higher response rate. Is it a survey that's sent out where these questions are using logic in order to ask? I think that's the space that I would really encourage you to think about, just because of the scale. Like, I was a full-time dedicated employee. Johns Hopkins didn't put limits on how many times I could contact participants, right? So I like emailed them 3 times and called them twice.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. You can't always do that when you're not staffed in accordance with those types of needs. So thinking about how to, and it could also be the opportunity to work with the universities. Each might field their own unmet desire survey, so that the work is, I'll say, not farmed out, but collaborated on, and the findings are then culled and that they're analyzed at a larger level to kind of identify where are the regional challenges and where are the regional opportunities. What I did not mention in the approach slide, but you will see reflected in the handout, is that the final question is actually, who are you already collaborating with and who should be part of this? And so that's, or are there any other collaborators you are working with on this challenge? But the piece that can be added is who else should be part of this? And so I think that's the space that the federal government can also really help influence because of the current political environment and incentives that are out there. And then the final piece that I'll just mention is this didn't emerge really strongly as a theme necessarily, but understanding and identifying what opportunities are available at the federal level and the capacity to respond to them was a challenge. And so thinking about if you were to do something around the surveying, kind of how might you facilitate the funding of those collaborations to ease some of the administrative burden that local policymakers feel in securing this type of funding to do the work. But happy to continue talking about this. Super excited for you. It's amazing.
Thanks.
We have some great feedback in the chat. And I think some of these great ideas lead into our small group discussion in terms of the role that TRUCEN can play. You know, for example, Aaron shared, you know, does anyone here do work or have ideas for efficiently and transparently tracking, managing, and sustaining these connections and projects? And so that may be something I'd love to pull. Let's remember that, and we can put that in the small group discussion because we'll be keeping notes, and that's a great idea. And then so I just want to acknowledge these great ideas that are in the chat. What we'll do now before we jump into small group discussion is just share some synergies with of the research that Leah just shared with TRUCEN aims. And I think Bobby did she used a word I really loved in the beginning of our conversation today of this being emblematic of what TRUCEN wants to see happen, what TRUCEN does. So TRUCEN believes strongly that research universities have a role to play in helping solve some of the world's pressing challenges, which, as Bobby said, is climate change is emblematic of that. And so, you know, looking at, this is actually coming from the TRUCEN website and thinking about the connections between TRUCEN and Leah's research, which really resonates with what I'm doing at UCLA as well. But looking at TRUCEN's website, TRUCEN articulates that scholarly activities that combine academic standards with community collaboration, talks about development of practical solutions and making a difference. And then also, so there's scholarly activities, which also intersects closely often with teaching and combining deep understanding with reciprocity and in community, and developing in students knowledge, skills, collaborative competencies, and dispositions to, again, address our greatest challenges, such as climate change. So the kind of what Lee has talked about today, climate policy engagement, is exactly the kind of work that TRUCEN can elevate. It can incentivize. It can address barriers, institutional barriers that are keeping us from doing this the best and most effective way. I mean, the unmet desire that she talked about, the gap between, you know, the supply and the demand, the unmet desire, 90%, relational concerns, and the lack of institutionalization of this, and the need for boundary spanners, that there's a lot of work that can be done to address that gap, these barriers, for R1 institutions to be a better partner, to be a good partner in making meaningful change. So that's some synergies in terms of what I think TRUCEN can do. And we'll get into this much deeper. We'll break out into 2 small groups in a second. And then also, if we can go to the next slide, I'll share some examples from UCLA. It's great because my colleague, Erin, who spoke a bit earlier when we were discussing, she's actually the executive director of the LA Regional Collaborative for Climate Change and Sustainability. And my center, the Center for Community Engagement, has had the great fortune of working with her this past year on really they were already doing community engaged work before in their pilot extreme heat campaign, but she and her team really wanted to make it community engaged and really work in meaningful ways in communicating around extreme heat. So one of the issues I noted actually for Erin and I is, it was like 30% when you had the different areas of desire in terms of research, communication was 30%. So that's something I noticed for the work Erin and I are doing together. But so she really, and working with her, my center working with her, she really wanted a community engaged approach. And so we've done this in the past year through community advisory groups, through focus groups, and are happy to say that we feel like we have content that reflects community voice going into the 2023. We call it a season now, extreme heat season in LA, unfortunately. It's now a season. And we also have, we've with partners have future funding and are nesting it in future collaborative efforts. So it wasn't, we were really intentional on doing this for this particular year, but making it intentional and sustainable beyond this year. Some other examples at UCLA are the Center for Climate Science, which really tries to bridge what community partners need, what their needs are, and then creating climate change projections that help them plan for the future. Other partners, sorry, that's loud behind me, I apologize. Other partners at UCLA that we work with are the LA Grand Challenge and the Institute of Transportation Studies just launched something called the Traction Initiative, which is when climate change is integrated across this initiative, but which is to transform transportation in the LA region, which if anyone has had to deal with transportation in the LA region, it is like really needed. And then another thing is, another example here at UCLA is, so the Institute of Environment and Sustainability has a broad range of efforts that are working with community partners. One to highlight, and again, my colleague Erin and I are doing this together this year, is their environmental science practicum, where we work with students. Students are broken out into teams and work with community partners on a need or desire that a community partner has. And it's a whole year-long effort. So Leah kind of ties into working with students for a whole year. I think in the curriculum of this program, they really get it sort of, and this is something I've worked with the professor, is really creating a community engaged approach. So the students are applying sort of best practices of how to work with community partners. And that's good that they've been intentional about that. And are increasingly interested in that too. And then a new thing that's UC system-wide is this coming out of the UC Office of the President is this UC Climate Action Initiative that came out in January, and people submitted proposals. So it was a funding opportunity across the UC system, across the state. What was interesting about it is it really highlighted community engagement. Like community engagement was key in the call. And so that was sort of an interesting, that was good to see. It was very welcome to see that it was highlighted so much and emphasized. And then it also allowed for community engagement centers across UC campuses to play an advisory role on how to develop a community engaged proposal. So, oh yeah, let me see. Oh, okay, cool. Thanks, Bobby. And then just sharing what, oh yeah, so Erin is sharing some work with Traction. She's saying one of the great things about Traction is that they have a good bit of seed funding, which will pay all the community-based organization reps to participate in the development of bottom-up research ideas, which is key because a lot of times, and I see this too often, a lot of times university partners will have an idea and they're being tasked to bring partners, but they bring them in too late. And so it's really important to bring partners in as soon as possible to make it truly a co-productive process. And so, so it's great to see people communicating in the chat. This is great. So what we'll do in the interest of time is we'll go to the small group conversations now. These are the questions we'll have. They're linked. We'll take about maybe closer to 15 minutes. We've had the good problem of having generative conversation. So I think that's great. That's what we'll just keep it 15 minutes or so, unless Bobby, you tell me otherwise. And the questions are already in the Google Doc, but the focus of the conversation should be, or we're hoping will be, is, how can the research findings that Leah shared today be valuable and apply to inform your work? What questions linger? What additional conversations you need? And I love that the chat is already sort of seeding some of these ideas and questions. What research questions does this raise that TRUCEN can consider investigating? And how might Campus Compact TRUCEN support your work in this space going forward? Again, I think there's some great ideas already in the chat. We have the notes link there. And then we'll just ask that one representative in your group will do a brief share back at the end. I feel like I talked very fast there at the end. Any questions? Something I missed?
Okay,
Is that okay?
that's great. So we're going into the rooms. I'm going to bring everybody back at about 3:05.
Oh yeah, you're three. I was like 3:05. You mean 12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, on the East Coast.
time.
So that's a little bit, yeah, so then there'll be 10 minutes for reporting out. So, okay. there we
Perfect.
go. Welcome back.
Hello. We had a nice chat. So we only have what, like 9 more minutes? Is that right, Bobby? Okay. So maybe we'll just have someone from each group can just share some of the reflections that they had or what. Yeah.
You know what I just noticed? The whole chat from the time before went away. And there were a lot of links in there that I wanted to save, and it's gone. Even though I hit save the chat. So I'm hoping someone saved those. I'm just mentioning that because someone will be looking for those later.
Good call. I doesn't it save them when you record, Bobby?
Yeah, I can still see the entire chat, so I'm not so sure what that might have done if you went to breakouts, maybe because I didn't. So I will definitely export the entire chat and make sure that we kind of think about how that we summarize that in the comments. Sorry about that.
Well, I'm happy to jump in and just do a quick summary of our group discussion. I know some folks had to hop off at 3. So we talked a little bit about in terms of on research findings, use and connections. I think everyone thought super valuable information that was shared out today. At University of Miami, they shared just the success story of trying to support partners in getting funding to be able to actually, implement certain policies or whatnot and move that work forward, and certainly helpful when you actually have funding to be able to do that. There were a number of lingering questions or needs or support from TRUCEN that we touched on. And one of the main things was just that conversations like this are really valuable and helpful in being able to have a sustained ongoing dialogue in this vein. Someone had mentioned, they're interested to see how the new Campus Compact Climate Action Corps could support this at an institutional level. Another lingering question, trying to summarize here, is just, if you're at a particularly large institution, how do you even help your local partners even navigate that institution? Where do they go? Is it your community engaged learning group? Is it your office of sustainability? Is it your government relations office? Is it extension? Is it, individual researchers that might have connections, and just how that can kind of create some messiness. And I think there was also just some general discussion of being able to leverage researchers and how, using science to help inform policy and move things forward. And I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Laura. Who would like to, we were negotiating who was going to be a representative when we got pulled back. So, but I want to offer up space for someone from our group to provide a quick summary.
I mean, I'm happy to do it. Somebody has to do it.
Good, because I was about to nominate you.
Oh no. Oh dear. So let's see here. Yeah, so we had a great conversation. I mean, it was really wonderful. So we and first of all, we showered Leah with praise. That was the first thing that we did. Then afterwards, we let's see. So we mostly, I guess, talked about what research questions does this raise that TRUCEN may consider investigating. And how can Campus Compact / TRUCEN support your work in this space going forward? And so we talked about how this work is often not funded out of core dollars. And when we say like this work, we were sort of thinking kind of very broadly, and a number of folks really sort of kind of fleshed that out of what that could be, what this work could be. And so that was like the third bullet point in the Google Doc. What are the values of collaborative relationships? People want relational interactions, reciprocity, not just one-way exchanges. So not just webinars. The importance of long-term relationships and relationship building. And so we were sort of talking about that as like one of the kinds of things that really, could be sort of funded more, and kind of what that might look like. Let's see. And then maybe how TRUCEN can also make connections to larger national urban networks, like the Urban Sustainability Directors Network was one example that was given. And then we talked about how trucking can also better support boundary spanners who are working in this space. And can bring together folks across the network, or how in the past trucking has brought together folks across the network to address these questions and have a statement paper that might be helpful on the topics in the from the past as well. So yeah, it was great.
Thanks, Adam. I think with that, we are, I mean, we're good, we're right on time. Maybe we just pull up the last slide, Leah, if that's okay, because we have some contact information and things like that we'd love to just share and have an opportunity for you all to grab if you'd like. So there's our contact information if you'd like to reach out to anything. We'll be sharing, like I said, we do have a lot of people shared some informative links in the chat, so we'll share those out. And then also, I really, really love the handout that Leah has offered us to use for our own work and to apply in our own work. And I know that I find it very useful. And so I think that's great that you all can have access to that as well. And just want to emphasize that that's here and can be adapted for your all's work locally. And so with that, Bobby, we hand it back to you. And Leah, thank you so much. I really, your work really resonated, you know, for the work that I'm doing here at UCLA, and I think others as well on the call today, on the conversation today. So thank you for your time and collaboration.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to give Leah the last word as we wrap the session. And I just want to again offer such thanks to Leah and to Bemi, and I know to Adam, who's also been a big piece of support in this project. This is really exciting. I think there's been a lot of ideas. You know, there's been some pretty straightforward ideas around how this work can continue. And I know Renee is here on the call with us today. Renee Brown from Michigan State is on our leadership committee for trucking, along with Shalom, who works with Bemi and the rest of the team at UCLA. And we actually have a meeting on Friday. So it'll be great to kind of bring this to them and say, like, these were some of the takeaways from this conversation and see where we can go. But we will send everything out to everyone. So the presentation, the notes, the handout, the links, the recording of the session itself. So more to come. So Leah, any last words?
All that to say, to echo the thanks to Bobby and to Bemi, and of course to Adam for the last 18 months of support and collaboration. And to say that if you end up using our survey, please let us know how it went. Let us know what you changed. Let us know what worked, what didn't work. Let's make this generative in the spirit of collective impact. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining today, for engaging, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And for those in heat season, I hope it's not as terrible as it sounds.